Okay, so this is video number 2 of Aristotle's Politics, and what we're going to do now is talk about Aristotle's concept of nature. Now, the concept of nature Aristotle really discusses in a book called The Physics. The word physis actually means nature. That is Aristotle's word for nature. And this concept is absolutely central to the politics. What is the politics it's about? It's really understanding the nature of the polis. It is a natural phenomena, as he says, and therefore politics is an outgrowth of this thing, and it's it's basically what happens in the polis, right? In terms of its public life. So let's turn here and go to our title page. Aristotle's account of nature. The first thing that we should say is historians, intellectual historians who chart the trajectory of ideas and concepts over time, claim that it is the Greeks that are really the first to conceive of something called nature. This is important, as being the cause of things that we see through our senses, right? If you think about the ancient world, the cause of things was not the natural world. Starting out with a natural world, the world that we can perceive with our senses and understand with our minds and understand with our reason. For the ancient world, the cause of things was God or the gods, right? They worked through nature. Their actions and their cause was evident in nature, but nature was really only a medium, you might even say like a plaything for the gods. Greek philosophy, in reorienting itself away from religion, not just Greek religion, but religion as such, said that no, the cause of things is not gods operating behind nature or spirits operating behind nature that can neither be seen nor clearly grasped through the mind, but the cause of things is nature itself. Let's just give an obvious example. When you see a lightning bolt and thunder shower, it's not a lightning bolt thrown by Zeus. And there's a hilarious line in the clouds where they say, when it rains, it's because Zeus is pissing through a sieve, right? It's not Zeus. It's the clouds that make it rain. It's the clouds that make it thunder. Isn't it obvious, right? And therefore the causes of things could be seen, right? And obviously the sense of sight being one of the central ways that we understand and know about the world. We even use that as a metaphor to talk about understanding and knowledge. We see it, we grasp it, we understand it. Okay, so what is philosophy? So Aristotle's a philosopher. What does philosophy inquire to fundamentally? Not about the nature of the gods, but about the nature of the seen world, the world that comes through our 5 senses, right? And the polis is this great example of something we live in and experience with all of our senses and our body and our souls and our minds. Okay, so let's just go back to this basic model here of these 4 types of communities. Each of them, in a sense, has its own nature, and they are all tending toward or developing toward the polis, right? And so ultimately what we're concerned with in the politics is understanding the nature of the polis. In chapter 2, the first sentence of chapter 2 of the Politics, Aristotle says this. He says, if one were to see how things develop naturally from the beginning, one would, in this case as in others, get the best view of them, right? So it's about seeing something. And what are we concerned to see in the Politics in Book 1? We're concerned to see this natural development, What is the culmination of this natural development? I should start this way. What is the seed kernel? What is the seed of this natural development? It's the couple, right? And their needs. But what does it flourish into? What is the goal of this development? It's the polis, right? So in looking at these communities, we're seeing the natural development of human community from its essential foundation in the couple to its full realization or completion in the polis. Okay. What does the word nature mean? What does the word nature come from? For Aristotle, the Greek word for nature is physis. It's where we get our word physics, physical, right? Pertaining to the natural world that can be observed by the senses. What is the physis of a thing? So there's different ways we can think about nature. We can think of the natural world, which is to say the non-man-made world, the world that would occur if human beings weren't around. And that's certainly part of what Aristotle is talking about. But he also has a more specific meaning than just that. He says the physis is the nature of a thing. So not just the natural world, but the nature of a thing. Physis has to do with things that are natural beings. Aristotle says there are some things that occur by nature, and there's some things that occur by accident. So it's something that exists by nature rather than accident. Something that exists by nature is and always is, and something that occurs by accident is unique and particular and does not persist over time. So this is really interesting. Aristotle is going to make a claim that what we can have knowledge of in a science like politics or physics or any other type of science, we can only have knowledge of things that are by nature, things that exist always, in perpetuity, permanently, right? Because it's only those things that have a fixed identity. Things that exist by accident are transient. You might make the distinction between there are facts of accident, but there's no knowledge of facts, because facts are not permanent things. The kinds of things you have knowledge of, or things that are true, are things that are always the case, right? The light can be on, the light can be off. That's a fact, right? It's of the nature of the thing that can be on or on, but on and or off. But in and of itself, there's no truth in one or the other, because neither is fixed. Okay. So physis is the nature of the thing. It's the permanent essence or unique and fixed identity, in contradistinction to the nature of other things and to accidents. So he's trying to discriminate the nature of one thing from the other. So for example, what's the difference in the nature of the polis from the nature of the village? This is really crucial, because different things have different types of natures, different essences, you might say. Initially, Aristotle associates nature with a characteristic movement or motion of a thing, if it's a type of thing that moves, right? So probably the best example of that is planetary motion. So he would say that the nature of the earth is to move in an elliptical path around the sun and to rotate in perpetuity, and that helps describe its nature. So the nature of the thing is not just the physical substance, it's also its pattern of behavior. Its pattern of behavior. So for living things, the pattern of behavior of living things is not just to move, but to grow and to develop from birth to death in a process of development, a cycle of life, and to behave in a characteristic way that is distinct and unique to the nature of that thing, right? Toward a goal. So we've said a lot of things there. It's a process of development and decay, a cycle of life. It also exhibits in that cycle a characteristic activity. And Aristotle's going to say the nature of each, say, animal is to behave in a certain characteristic way, to have certain capacities that distinguish it from other animals. This is not simply a physiognomy of the animal, the physical makeup. It's what it does with that physiognomy. It's what it does with its body, right, or its mind, right? So it has a characteristic activity. He's going to say of human beings, what is the characteristic, in the ethics, what is the characteristic behavior of human beings? It's their capacity to use reason and speech and reason, logos. We are the zoon logikon. So that, and he's going to say that is the behavior or the activity that distinguishes us from other animals and from plants, and therefore helps to identify our nature by distinguishing it. But he says something further. He says this process of development and this characteristic behavior based on our capacities or abilities is directed toward a specific and particular goal, right? Therefore, he understands the nature of the thing, not simply in this total process, but really the very specific understanding of its nature is identified with its kind of peak, or the state in which it is perfected as a natural being. And what he will use the word, or very often interpreted as flourishing, right? Therefore, nature implies not just random development, but development in which certain accidents don't inhibit its growth and its reaching maturity. So, for example, you could have a seed, and the seed's goal, you could say, its purpose, is to grow into a flower. You can imagine if the seed lands on the sidewalk, it's never going to have a chance to grow into a flower. It's never going to be able to fulfill its nature because there is an accident which inhibits it from flourishing, right? Okay. So 3 really important concepts that are going to be applied both to human community and the human individual. Everything for the nature of a thing can be broken down into these 3 essential components. And really, these 3 essential components are its nature. So everything has what he calls a telos. And this is famous kind of Aristotle's what's called teleological science. A science of ends, or a science of purposes. Aristotle believes that everything in existence performs a characteristic activity toward a certain goal or purpose, an end, a goal, a purpose, or a final cause, right? And the final cause is the thing that really is the underlying cause that dictates all of the actions of the thing, right? For human beings, Aristotle is going to say our telos, our final cause, is happiness. And therefore, you might say that the immediate cause of me sitting down to breakfast is because I'm hungry. But why am I really, in the big picture, doing all this? There's a final cause at work, and that's happiness, because I want to eat a certain amount of breakfast so then I can go and perform my day at the highest level I'm capable of doing it. Okay, so a goal. The next is what's called ergon. And in this text, it's often translated as function or task. In the Nicomachean Ethics, it's often going to be translated as work or characteristic activity. And the nature of a thing dictates both a goal, but also that each thing has a characteristic way of functioning or working. It performs a specific task. And ultimately, for a human being, this is a certain way we live, right? The key thing is that achieving this goal does not happen of its own accord, but requires work, labor, a process of active development. So ergon implies active development. And therefore, it is the means to the end. It's the means, it's the work that is used to achieve the goal. What's our characteristic activity going to be? It's going to be rational activity. We are going to direct our lives, instead of saying characteristic activity, it has to do the characteristic way human beings live. And the characteristic way we live is to direct our lives through our reasoning. By which I don't mean, or Aristotle doesn't mean, that we're all sitting there as philosophers contemplating existence. We're simply using our mind to think, to solve the problems in order to achieve our goals. Okay. The last one, number 3, arete. Arete, meaning excellence or virtue, right? When we typically, the best and most straight translation of this word is virtue. When we think of virtue, we always think of kind of moral character, moral excellence. But for the Greeks, it means something more general than moral excellence. It simply means excellence. To do something as well as possible and to do it as well as one is able. In particular, the excellence of a thing is the specific excellence of a thing in light of its nature and telos, right? Let's clarify. Last line here. When you perform your work well and you achieve your goal or your telos, you have done it excellently or virtuously. right? I can throw a ball, right? But when Tom Brady throws a touchdown in the Super Bowl, he hasn't just thrown a ball, he has thrown it excellently and has achieved his goal. You could say 1 of completing the pass, and 2 of getting the touchdown, and 3, it's a game-winning drive, right? His goal is not just to complete the pass, his goal is to win the game and use his throwing ability, his excellent throwing ability, to win the game. Okay, so you can see how all these concepts are related. Perhaps the most important concept is this concept of a telos, an end or a goal or a purpose or a final cause. It is the goal toward which the functioning of the thing is aiming. It's the goal at which all our life actions are aiming. It is the thing for the sake of which everything or all activities are performed. Related words that we see in this text in translation are completed and complete. So human community is completed when we get to the polis. The polis is the complete or teleos community, which means it's perfect. Now this is an important concept. Complete, synonymous with perfect. What do we mean by perfect? We don't mean that it's, more perfect than any human being is capable. What we mean is that all the raw abilities of the being, let's just say a human being, all its capacities, all its raw native talents have been educated, habituated, and given an opportunity to fully mature and flourish. All the potentials and capacities of the thing have been realized. And when all those capacities have been fully realized, they have been perfected, right? And therefore they've been finished and brought to the natural end. What is their natural end? The telos, which is connected with their nature. So when you've reached the end of your nature, you've been completed, and there is nothing wanting anymore because everything has been realized. Therefore it's complete. For human nature, you think what we're really talking about is a process of maturation toward like a peak moment of a human being. And therefore, the telos of the human being is not death. The telos is the kind of peak of existence, a certain maturity for the Greeks and, for modern humans, but particularly for Plato, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. The peak of a human being would not just be the peak development of their body, but the peak development of their mind. And actually, they give a kind of age around between 40 and 50, when they saw that the person had both the education and worldly experience to have their mind kind of fully developed, and you could say that would be the age at which they could hold the reins of power in the most kind of prudent way. Okay, so examples always help. What are we talking about here? Let's take the nature of a knife. Really, really simple. What's the nature of a knife? Well, its telos is to cut, right? And it's not just that the knife is sharp. It's not just that it's been designed to cut. It's that the telos is actually to do the job, right? And, Aristotle would say a knife that doesn't actually cut is not really a knife. Or a basketball player that can't actually make a basket is not really a basketball player. Other interesting things. Aristotle will say, in effect, that a human being that doesn't really use its reason to its fullest extent is not really a full human being, right? Because it's not simply what you are in your nature or what defines your nature. It's what you do with what you have. Okay, so the ergon is cutting. That is the activity of a knife. And the arete is its sharpness, or really any characteristic that makes the knife makes the knife able to cut as well as possible, right? So I think the answer is basically the sharpness, but you could think of other properties that would help it cut, right? And the excellence is not which allows it to cut well and fulfill its task of cutting, right? The nature of the knife is to cut well and thereby fulfill its task. Okay, So Aristotle says this in the Physics. He says, each natural thing has within itself a principle of motion or change, of being at rest or being in motion, right? So here it almost sounds like he's talking about a planet rotating around the sun. But obviously for the human being, which is what we're really concerned with, it's a process of growth and development that can only happen fully and completely, or be perfected under certain circumstances. Okay. He says, for a thing is more properly said to be what it is when it has attained to fulfillment than when it exists potentially. A thing's nature is exhibited in the process of growth by which its nature is attained. So here its nature is not just to exist, but to actually grow and fulfill its raw potentials. You can think about a human being has a first nature, what's given to us by our biology, and a second nature, which is to say what's cultivated in us. And he sees that second nature, in a sense, as more the essence of our nature than our first nature, because our first nature is just the raw potential, and our second nature is really the fulfillment of that raw potential. Okay. So let's do a simple little experiment to clarify. What is more the nature of the oak tree, the acorn or the mature tree? Aristotle is going to say it's the mature tree that really exhibits the full and complete nature of it. The nature of the thing is not inert. It is a process of development of growth. The true nature of the thing is exhibited in its full development, maturation, or flourishing. Right? Therefore, human nature is not just identified with our genes or our physiognomy of our bodies. Our nature is not just what we are physically, but our capacities and specifically what we do with ourselves or what we do with them. We consist of a body and a soul. We have virtues of the body and we have virtues of the soul. Let me just move this here. Nature, therefore, is a functional concept. The human being is defined not simply as a being with a body, but with a fully human life and existence. In the politics, we're concerned with the collective identity of our nature. We're the zoon logikon. We're the speaking and reasoning animal. And we've seen how it's self-evident that speech, in light of the fact that its primary and original function is communication, that is a social attribute and a social faculty that's going to bring us together in types of communities, as we've seen in Sapiens, that is unique to the human species. And of course, we're still holding off on it, but the political animal, the animal that's destined for the polis, is a very special type of community that is dependent on our capacities of speaking and reasoning together. Thus, we are fully human, or really human, you might say, complete or perfect only when we participate in our rational and political natures. Think about that for a second. Aristotle's very cruel here. You are not a human being simply because you were born genetically as a human being, for Aristotle. You are only fully human. You might make that distinction between merely human and fully human when you engage in these core faculties. And it is, let me also add this, it is engaging in these political and rational dimensions of our abilities and our existence that actually fulfills our nature and makes us who we are. Okay. So now to end where we began. We've got this development, this natural development. And there's two ways you can understand this gradation from the couple to the polis. One, as we've said, is that these are the development logically, in that all these things naturally unfold from the couple to the family to the village to the polis. Or we could think of it historically. If we looked into the distant prehistoric past, we would see in the beginning there was a man and woman, And once they procreated, they formed a family. And once the family spread out, eventually the village is really just an extension of an extended family. And then when many villages branch off and different villages come together, they start to form a polis. So you could see it either as a logical or as a historical development here. He could be acting as a philosopher and analyzing this, or he could be analyzing it as a historian. Two slightly different perspectives. Okay. So the polis is special. He calls it the political community. He calls it a complete community, a self-sufficient, an authoritative community, the community that is the natural end and completion of the development of all the prior communities. Right? It is the Talos of these communities. Okay, so let's conclude. I'm going to move myself down here with this passage from the Politics. He says, a complete community constituted out of several villages, once it reaches the limit of total self-sufficiency, practically speaking, is the city-state or polis. He calls it the complete community. And this means many things. Number one, it is the telos of this process of development of communities. Number two, it is self-sufficient. Now, self-sufficient means it has everything it needs to perform its task, its ergon. But that raises the question of, what is the task of the polis? What is self-sufficient for what? Right? And that is not clearly answered here, but maybe we get it in the next sentence. He says it comes into being for the sake of living, but it remains in existence for the sake of living well. The polis is self-sufficient because it contains all the necessary elements, not just of living or mere life, but of living well and the good life. Therefore, it has things in it, and it conceives of life in a slightly different way than the polis and the family. Than the village and the family. That is why every city-state exists by nature, because it's the fulfillment of human community, since the first communities do. For the city-state is their end, and nature is an end. For we say that each thing's nature, for example, that of a human being, a horse, or a household, is the character it has when its coming into being has been completed. Moreover, for the sake of which something exists, that is to say, its end, is best, and self-sufficiency is both end and best. Okay, so Aristotle, that's Aristotle for you right there. A little bit circular, but some important things. Human community arrives at an end that is complete. It has everything in it. Has everything in it for what? For the good life. What's another word for the good life that he's going to use in the ethics? For human happiness. He's going to say that all the faculties and powers of the human body and soul are not completely realized until we get to the polis that has all the institutions and division of labor, the arts and sciences, to actually provide the context for, you could say, all the sandbox or the jungle gym by which we can actualize all our potentials as human beings. And therefore it is best. It is best because it is the site, or it is the stage, it is the platform where human beings can first fully fulfill their identity. Now, exactly why that is the case and what goes on there that's so different than the other three communities, we will have to look at